Hello everyone, my name is Diletta Manago and I'm the EU Regional Expert at ENISA. In this video, I will walk you through what 2026 looks like from an EHS perspective in the EU. So 2026 is the year when many long discussed measures start applying in day-to-day practice. And today I will focus on the main areas most likely to affect companies operating across the EU in 2026. So we have industrial permitting under the revised Industrial Emissions Directive, the packaging and packaging waste regulation, PFAS, the so-called forever chemicals, worker chemical exposure rules, the EU climate law update with a new 2040 target, and also regulatory simplifications concerning the carbon border adjustment mechanism and AI systems related rules. So let's start with what actually changed in the regulatory framework. As for industrial emissions, the revised Industrial Emissions Directive, often referred to as IED 2.0, has been enforced since August 2024, but 2026 is when many companies begin to feel it in practice. Indeed, member states must transpose the directive's update by the 1st of July 2026, and this deadline is already influencing how authorities plan permit reviews. One of the core objectives of the IED update is expanding the overall scope in order to cover more activities to reduce unregulated emissions. And as of 2026, industrial sites will increasingly face tighter permit conditions in accordance with the national transposing measures, including new and stricter environmental performance and emission limit values, as well as more stringent conditions on granting derogations, stronger protection of soil and water, requirements linked to energy, water, and raw material use and reuse, and also requirements aimed at reducing the use of hazardous chemicals. Across countries, regulators are signaling a similar direction of travel, such as closer alignment with best available techniques, a more structured and increasingly digital data expectations, and also more active permit management. Now, moving on to packaging. From the 12th of August 2026, the packaging and packaging waste regulation starts to apply across the EU. So companies placing packaging on the EU market will have to meet stricter sustainability requirements, including minimizing the presence of substances of concern and restrictions on PFAS in food contact packaging supported by technical documentation. From the same date, packaging producers will also have to provide specific information to consumers, covering waste prevention, separate collection, and the meaning of labels and symbols, as well as environmental impacts. In parallel, national registers of producers become more operational at member state level, and companies must continue to navigate national extended producer responsibility implementing roles, including registration, data reporting, and fee obligations. In practice, packaging compliance becomes more product-focused at the EU level. However, not all the packaging and packaging waste regulation obligations apply from 2026. Indeed, several key requirements such as recyclability performance classes, minimum recycled content, some waste reduction targets, labeling rules, and reuse targets will apply from later dates spanning from 2027 to 2040, depending on the actual provision. Now, moving on to PFAS. In 2026, PFAS moves on to different tracks at the same time in the EU. On one hand, we have the EU-wide universal PFAS restriction proposal under the REACH regulation. Following the update of the PFAS proposal in 2025, the scientific work of the committees of the European Chemicals Agency, ECHA, strongly points towards a group-based ban with targeted and time-limited derogations. Indeed, both the ECHA's Committee for Risk Assessment and the Committee for Socioeconomic Analysis support an EU-wide restriction on the manufacture, placing on the market, and use of PFAS under REACH. Specifically, in March 2026, the Committee for Risk Assessment finalized its opinion, while the Committee for Socioeconomic Analysis published its draft opinion with public consultation open until the 25th of May 2026. The final opinion is expected by the end of 2026. After that, the Commission will go on and propose the restriction to the REACH Committee. So the direction is now clear enough to already influence companies' decisions, especially around a potential PFAS substitution. On the other hand, PFAS is already operational under certain sector rules. For instance, from the 12th of January 2026, drinking water in the EU must comply with the PFAS parametric value set out in the Drinking Water Directive, and member states must enforce either one or both the limits of 0.1 microgram per liter for the sum of 20 listed PFAS, or 0.5 microgram per liter for total PFAS. In addition, from October 2026, specific PFAS obligations start to apply to companies using firefighting foams containing PFAS at a concentration above 1 milligram per liter, alongside a prohibition on the placing on the market of such foams in portable fire extinguishers, subject to limited derogations. These measures form part of a phased approach, leading towards a full ban on the marketing and use of PFAS-containing firefighting foams by 2030, with only narrowly defined exemptions. Together, these developments bring PFAS firmly into routine compliance in the EU. Now, moving on to worker chemical exposure, the EU rules on carcinogens, mutagens, and reprotoxic substances continue to evolve. In 2025, the Commission proposed a further amendment to the Carcinogens, Mutagens, and Reprotoxic Substances Directive, the so-called CMR Directive, including new occupational exposure limit values for certain CMR substances that you can see on the slide, and also the inclusion of work involving exposure to welding fumes to the list of relevant CMR processes in Annex 1 to the CMR Directive. The Council of the EU later strengthened this proposal by suggesting an exposure limit for isoprene, and negotiations between the Parliament and the Council are expected to continue into late 2026. So for companies, 2026 is more about readiness, including checking whether exposure controls actually work. Now, moving on to climate. In March 2026, the EU adopted an amendment to the EU climate law, setting a binding climate target for 2040, requiring member states to reduce their net greenhouse gas emissions by 90% compared to the 1990 levels. Although this does not directly affect companies' operations and compliance at this stage, it is certainly going to shape how future industrial and emissions rules are being designed in the EU. Indeed, to reach the 2040 climate target, the Commission is expected to review relevant EU climate legislation, such as the Emissions Trading System Directive, the so-called ETS Directive. Finally, the same amendment also postponed the introduction of the emissions trading system for buildings, road transport, and additional sectors, the so-called ETS, to applicable to fuel suppliers by 1 year, namely from 2027 to 2028. Now, moving on to simplification themes, we have updates concerning the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, the so-called CBAM, and also the AI Act simplification proposal. So under the Omnibus I package adopted in October 2025, the CBAM was amended to ease compliance, especially for small importers. Key changes starting in 2026 onwards include a broad exemption from the 1st of January 2026 for companies importing up to 50 tons per year of CBAM goods, simplified embedded emissions calculations, a new option to deduct carbon prices paid in third countries, and more flexible compliance rules in the CBAM definitive phase, including later deadlines for CBAM declaration and certificate surrender, moved to the end of September, and finally, as of 2027, lower quarterly certificate holding thresholds down from 80 to 50% of the emissions embedded in all imported goods. Overall, CBAM remains in place, but 2026 brings more breathing room for companies. Now, as for the AI simplification proposal in November 2025, the Commission launched a public consultation on simplifying certain parts of the EU AI Act. Negotiations between the Commission, the Parliament, and the Council of the EU continue into 2026. But if this proposal is ultimately adopted, it would, among other things, remove mandatory AI literacy obligations for companies, simplify conformity assessments, reduce registration requirements for certain non-high-risk systems, and also give small and medium enterprises lighter quality management obligations. And finally, compliance deadlines for high-risk AI systems would also be pushed back into 2027 and 2028. Now, moving on to scope and applicability, we are going to take a look at who is going to be most affected by the changes in 2026. First of all, we have industrial operators now under the expanded scope of the IED 2.0, including operators carrying out mining of metal, manufacturing of batteries, but also waste landfills and more intensive pig and poultry farms. And we have companies placing packaging or packaged products on the EU market across the full value chain, companies with PFAS anywhere in their footprint from products to processes, employers with higher chemical exposure risks, for instance, welding, metalworking or other chemical intensive activities, emissions intensive assets, importers of CBAM goods, especially those above the threshold of 50 tons per year of cement, aluminum, iron, steel, or fertilizers. And finally, companies developing, marketing, or deploying AI systems, especially in the case of high-risk AI systems. Now, as for the practical implications for companies, as we saw from 2026, a number of regulatory measures move into phases where operational readiness really matters for companies. As for industrial sites, the revised IET increasingly affects how permits are going to be managed in the EU. With transposition deadlines approaching, the focus is shifting from understanding the new rules to ensuring that permits, monitoring arrangements, and operating parameters can withstand updated national practices. As for packaging, compliance becomes an ongoing product-level exercise. So companies must be able to demonstrate that packaging placed on the market meets EU-level requirements over time, including providing consumer information and keeping up with data and reporting flows. Moreover, PFAS management becomes more concrete. Drinking water monitoring, firefighting foam restrictions, and the progressing REACH restriction proposal all apply in parallel, meaning that PFAS considerations increasingly need to be embedded across products and processes. For worker chemical exposure, even before the new limits are formally adopted, inspection focus is moving towards whether exposure controls work in practice, requiring robust risk assessments and monitoring systems. And as for the 2040 climate target, even though no compliance duty is immediately triggered, the new target is going to shape how future industrial emissions and energy rules are framed in the EU, especially for long-lived assets and investment decisions. When it comes to CBAM, a more operational compliance phase started in 2026. And while simplifications ease burdens for some importers, companies still need to ensure that their internal processes support reporting, calculations, and administrations under the revised rules. Finally, for AI, proposed simplifications may reduce for future administrative burdens, but until adopted, the existing framework applies. So the practical implication for companies is tracking evolving obligations rather than assuming the regulation. Finally, moving on to what to watch next, looking ahead into late 2026 and 2027, there are a few aspects worth keeping an eye on. First of all, how the IED 2.0 is going to be applied in practice once national transposition deadlines pass in July 2026, especially how permit reviews and updates roll out across the member states. As for packaging, attention will quickly turn to guidance documents and early enforcement signals, which will shape the consistency of the actual rules application. As for PFAS, the focus will be on the next milestones in the REACH restriction proposal. On worker protection, companies should watch for national guidance on exposure limits, especially for welding fumes, as EU-level proposals move closer to completion. Also, all of these sits alongside early post-2030 climate policy, increasingly informed by the EU's binding 2040 target. Moreover, CBAM also continues to evolve. From 2026, the focus shifts to determining whether imports remain in scope and how the simplified rules apply in the definitive phase. Finally, as for AI, it will be crucial to see whether and how the proposed simplifications are ultimately adopted in the EU. So to wrap up, 2026 is less about new concepts and more about EHS reform operating in real conditions. The common thread is that compliance is becoming more operational and more interconnected. To stay ahead, companies will have to treat regulatory compliance as a governance and execution challenge with clear accountability, solid data flows, and one consistent approach. At ENISA, we help companies navigate this phase by tracking what applies and when, and translating regulatory change into clear, actionable obligations. So if you would like support to strengthen your business compliance, get in touch with our team.